I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. As an amateur ghost hunter, I visited many supposedly haunted places, but nothing prepared me for what I encountered one rainy night at the old Willowbrook Asylum. The asylum had been abandoned for decades, a relic of a bygone era when mental health was misunderstood and often cruelly managed. Its decaying facade stood ominously against the backdrop of a stormy sky, the wind howling through broken windows like the wails of the tormented souls rumored to still reside within its walls. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. My flashlight flickered to life, casting a weak beam that barely pierced the thick darkness inside. Every step echoed ominously in the vast, empty corridors, the sound of dripping water adding to the oppressive atmosphere. My goal was to reach the heart of the asylum, the infamous treatment room. Legend had it that horrific experiments had been conducted there, leaving behind a residual energy so strong that even skeptics felt an undeniable chill. I navigated the labyrinthine halls, my heart pounding in my chest, each creak and groan of the old building sending shivers down my spine. As I neared the treatment room, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath fogged in front of me, and the air grew heavy with an unsettling sense of dread. The door to the room was slightly ajar, creaking open as if inviting me in. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but my curiosity got the better of me. The room was in shambles, old medical equipment strewn about, rusted and covered in dust. A heavy iron bed sat in the center, leather restraints still attached, a grim reminder of the suffering endured here. I began setting up my equipment, positioning my camera to capture any potential paranormal activity. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, so soft it could have been my imagination. I froze, straining to listen. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, until it was clear it was a voice, pleading and desperate. "Help me, please." My blood ran cold. I scanned the room with my flashlight, but there was no one there. The voice continued, growing more frantic, and I realized it was coming from a corner of the room shrouded in darkness. Summoning all my courage, I approached, my heart hammering in my chest. As I drew closer, a figure began to materialize. It was a woman, her eyes wide with terror, her body emaciated and bruised. She reached out to me, her voice a raspy whisper. "They won't let me go. They won't let me leave." I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering wildly. The room seemed to come alive, the walls pulsing with a malevolent energy. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes that clawed at the air. The woman's figure flickered, her voice merging with a cacophony of screams and cries. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my equipment and bolted from the room, the sound of anguished wails following me down the hall. I didn't stop until I was outside, the rain pelting down on me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I glanced back at the asylum, its dark silhouette looming ominously against the stormy sky. To this day, I can't explain what I saw or heard that night. The footage I captured was distorted, filled with static and eerie shadows, but the voice was clear. "Help me, please." I never returned to Willowbrook Asylum, but the memory of that night haunts me still. Some things I've learned are better left undisturbed. I'm an experienced hiker, having trekked through some of the most challenging terrains in the country. But the story I'm about to tell you is one that still gives me nightmares and keeps me away from Devil's Peak. Devil's Peak is a notorious mountain, shrouded in mystery and fear. Locals tell tales of hikers who venture up its trails never to return, their disappearances attributed to the malevolent spirits said to inhabit the area. Naturally, I was skeptical, attributing such stories to superstition and fear of the unknown. One summer, a friend and I decided to hike Devil's Peak. It was a cloudy day, with a forecast of rain later in the evening, but we were confident we could make it to the summit and back before the weather turned. The trail was overgrown and rugged, a stark contrast to the well-maintained paths we were used to. As we ascended, the forest grew denser, the trees seeming to close in around us. An eerie silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and distant animal calls. We made good progress until we reached a clearing about halfway up, where we decided to take a break. While we rested, a dense fog began to roll in, enveloping us in a thick, damp shroud. Visibility dropped to just a few feet, and an unsettling feeling crept over me. I turned to my friend, but he was gone. I called out his name, my voice echoing back at me from the mist. Panic set in as I realized I was alone. I searched the clearing, my heart racing, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The fog grew thicker, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I decided to head back down the trail, hoping he had done the same. The descent was harrowing. The fog distorted everything, making it hard to distinguish the path from the underbrush. I could hear footsteps behind me, soft and deliberate, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there. Shadows darted at the edge of my vision, and I felt a constant prickling at the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. I stumbled upon a small, dilapidated cabin, hidden among the trees. Desperate and scared, I approached, hoping to find help or at least shelter from the oppressive fog. The door creaked open, revealing a dark interior. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The cabin was empty, save for a single dusty journal on a rickety table. I flipped it open, my hands trembling. The entries were written in a hurried, frantic scrawl, detailing the experiences of a previous hiker who had encountered the same phenomena. The last entry sent chills down my spine. The fog is alive. It took them all. Now it's coming for me. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut, plunging the cabin into darkness. I heard whispers all around me, unintelligible and filled with malice. The shadows seemed to move, growing and shrinking in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and I bolted out of the cabin, my mind in a frenzy. I ran down the trail, the fog clinging to me like a living thing. I didn't stop until I reached the base of the mountain, drenched in sweat and rain. My friend was never found. Search parties combed the area for weeks, but there was no trace of him. The locals shook their heads knowingly, muttering about the spirits of Devil's Peak. I never went back, and I never will. That mountain took something from me, something I can never get back. To this day, I still hear the whispers when the fog rolls in, a chilling reminder of the nightmare I barely escaped. I inherited Blackwood Manor from my grandmother, a grand old estate nestled deep in the countryside. I remembered visiting as a child, its sprawling grounds and ornate rooms filled with a sense of wonder and history. After her passing, I decided to move in, hoping to restore the manor to its former glory. The first few weeks were peaceful, albeit lonely. The manor was enormous, and I often found myself wandering its many rooms, uncovering hidden treasures and family heirlooms. One stormy night, however, everything changed. It was a particularly dark and rainy evening, the wind howling outside as I settled in the library with a cup of tea and a book. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the room, and the storm seemed to intensify, the rain pounding against the windows like desperate fingers trying to get in. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and an inexplicable sense of dread washed over me. I heard a faint whisper, almost imperceptible over the sound of the storm. "Leave this place." I froze, my heart pounding. The whisper came again, more insistent this time. "Leave now, or suffer the consequences." I glanced around the room, but there was no one there. The shadows seemed to move, twisting and shifting in the dim light. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. As I made my way upstairs to my bedroom, the whispers followed me, growing louder and more menacing. "You don't belong here." The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. I reached my room and shut the door, trying to block out the voices. That night, I had the most vivid and terrifying dream. I was standing in the grand hall, surrounded by a swirling mist. Figures emerged from the fog, their faces twisted in agony and rage. They reached out to me, their eyes hollow and accusing. "You must leave." I woke with a start, drenched in sweat, the storm still raging outside. The whispers were louder now, echoing through the halls of the manor. I could hear footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving towards my room. The doorknob rattled, and I felt a cold presence on the other side. Summoning all my courage, I threw open the door, but there was nothing there. The whispers stopped, and the oppressive energy lifted, leaving me shaken and terrified. I knew I couldn't stay in the manor any longer. Whatever haunted Blackwood Manor wanted me gone, and I wasn't about to challenge it. I packed a bag and left that night, the storm guiding me away from the cursed estate. The manor has remained abandoned since, a silent sentinel to the horrors that lie within. Some say they still hear the whispers on stormy nights, warning them to stay away. I believe them. I still have nightmares about that night, and I know I'll never forget the terror I felt. Blackwood Manor may be a grand and beautiful place, but it's a beauty that hides a dark and malevolent secret. If you ever find yourself near it, heed the whispers and stay away. Some things are better left undisturbed.